We're now on to our second class in the Regulation Masterclass, looking at the electricity industry. So this is a series run for electricity retailers, and it's drawing on our observations in relation to the areas that retailers fail. We want you to avoid those same mistakes. We want you to understand what the focus of the Australian Energy Regulator and the Essential Services Commission is, and we want to make sure that you've got the tools, the processes, and the procedures in place to show that you comply and to ensure that you can continue to run a successful business. Today, we're going to be looking at where other retailers fail. I'm going to briefly mention how you can prepare for the next round of audits, and I'll be mentioning what we're going to be looking at in our next webinar. In 2016, 2017, the Essential Services Commission audited 15 retail businesses. As you should know, the Essential Services Commission and the Australian Energy Regulator both have guidelines on how they'll audit energy businesses. Typically, they engage an external auditor to conduct the audit, and we've noticed a variation in how hard those external auditors go on the businesses being audited. I'd say that the 2016, 2017 audits were pretty light on. So they found non-compliance, which we'll discuss today, but there weren't really any major ramifications. At the other end of the spectrum, we've seen audits being conducted where non-compliance is found and those breaches are dealt with in the ordinary way. And that might result in fines being issued or in other regulatory action. So you can see we've got a key, and there were 4 main categories of finding, with the worst being non-compliance. It's worthwhile reading, as I mentioned, the ESC and AR audit guidelines, and we'll supply you with a copy or a link to those. So I picked out 3 random findings from the audit, but I thought that they're useful in that they show areas that your business could potentially improve. For M2 Energy, the Essential Services Commission found that improvements could be made in the area of explicit informed consent. And that was that staff training could be updated and that all calls should be recorded. So as you may know, explicit informed consent is required for a variety of different types of transaction, not just to transfer the customer and to take over responsibility for a NIMI. It's also required for a direct debit arrangement. One of the key requirements or recommendations is that calls are recorded. So it's fine that you have a process that involves, online sign up. But the question is, how do you verify that the person who's filled out that form online is who they say they are? How do you ensure that it's not, in fact, perhaps a sales rep that's employed by your company? And one of the key concepts in compliance is this idea of how incentives determine whether compliance is achieved. If you look at the Royal Banking Commission, the Financial Services Banking Commission that's going on at the moment, the key area of non-compliance is to do with brokers' commissions. And we saw loans that were written up by people that don't exist. Exactly the same thing happens in the energy industry. And that's why explicit informed consent is a big area of concern for both regulators. The Australian Energy Regulator published a compliance check on explicit informed consent. And what we recommend is that you not only have the primary record, but you have other records that verify that consent was obtained. Training's important, so you've got to train your staff on how to determine when explicit informed consent has been obtained. Something that Compliance Court is working on is an automated verification call system that will pick up on whether a customer is actually happy with proceeding with the deal. And all of that can be done in an automated fashion with calls recorded. So AGL and Power Direct, the area that they were non-compliant in for this audit was in relation to compliance and performance reporting. Compliance and performance reporting, just as with explicit informed consent, there's a lot of similarity between the AER guideline and the ESC guideline, but they are different. The key concept is that you need to collect information that you're required to report. One that I know that a lot of retailers struggle with is percentage of calls answered within 60 seconds. A lot of retailers start off and they don't have that reporting capability. Well, they don't have any choice. They need that because not submitting a report in the way that the ESC or the AER wants you to is potentially a breach. And on non-compliance, looking at potential non-compliances, there are 3 categories excuse me, of non-compliance, and they determine how quickly a non-compliance has to be reported. So you need a process in place for capturing potential non-compliance, assessing it, and then reporting it in accordance with the guidelines if you need to. Excuse me again. So the key themes: the need to develop and review scripts and training, the need for recording, so verification of consent, and the need for processes and policies to be documented and reviewed often, and the need for internal audit and external review. How do you prepare for your next audit? Excuse me. Review prior audit findings. I'll send you a link to the ESC's prior audits. Have a think about whether all of your documents, or all of the documents you need to provide to show compliance, are in the one place, and that's what the Compliance Hub achieves. And if you're not using the Compliance Hub, then shame on you. What I've found working in energy businesses is you go around and you develop a hardship policy, you develop a complaints policy, and then you literally put it in a Dropbox folder or you put it in a drawer somewhere. The problem is when an auditor comes knocking on the door, you have to show them your current policy. You also have to show them the evolution of that document. And in the Compliance Hub, we have an automated version control system. So that's what we do. And the Compliance Hub helps demonstrate compliance. Are you satisfied with the scripts that you're using? Do you have scripts for call center staff, for complaints handling staff, for staff that do welcome calls? Can you easily obtain records of explicit informed consent? What you should do is test and retest the systems and the processes that you've got in place. So even as the CEO of an energy company, take a sample of 100 accounts and check whether they're being managed correctly. Are notes being added to the account when customers call? Are there indications of hardship, and are they being captured? And for those 100 accounts, can you pull up the records of explicit informed consent? Can you get their contract? Can you get their bills? Do their bills comply with Rule 25 in the case of the NECF, National Energy Retail Rules, and the equivalent in the Energy Retail Code? And on an ongoing basis, other than you in the executive, do you have somebody who is doing internal audits on a regular basis to identify potential problems before they escalate and snowball? And lastly, who's looking over their work? So you might want to engage an external reviewer to have a look and see whether your processes are effective. The results of not doing so is something that we're going to consider in our next webinar. The results of not doing so include the regulatory enforcement options. Our next video is going to look at reporting in a little bit more detail. How do you deal with questions such as non-compliance? Do you not report it, or do you report it? And if you report it, how do you do that? How do you make sure that your reports are correct and are submitted on time? So thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next video.